But now we move on to the main story from tonight, which is on one Boris Johnson. The party, as you can read in 1984, they told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. They told you men can become women. They told you vaccines stop transmission. And they told you Boris Johnson was a Conservative. None of those claims are true, of course, not least the third one, because what kind of Conservative bankrupts Britain with a £3 trillion march towards net zero at the altar of climate change?
But I want to tell you that the cost of failing to reach net zero by 2050, the cost of failing to tackle climate change, will be much, much greater. We in the UK, I'm afraid to say we were the first, we were the beginners of the crime. We started, the Industrial Revolution began in this country. We began this huge pattern of hydrocarbon emissions.
Then he allowed record numbers of people, millions and their dependents, to come to this country willy-nilly in what's now infamously dubbed the Boris wave, despite claims like this.
But you could still have people coming in, provided they had a job to go to, and provided that they had talents and skills that were useful for the UK economy.
He had the world at his feet, didn't he? The future of Britain in his hands. He went from this...
It is now 10 o'clock and we can reveal the full details of the Joint Broadcasters exit poll, which is predicting a large Conservative majority.
To this.
I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world.
And ultimately, his failure to deal with a grubby little MP who couldn't keep his prying hands to himself left us with this.
Woman can have a penis.
Nick, I don't think we can conduct this debate with,
Sorry, have I offended you in some way?
No, it's just... I just...
A woman can have a penis.
I don't think that discussing this issue in this way helps anyone in the long run.
There we go. So why is any of this relevant? Well, breaking tonight is news that Tory leader Kemi Badenoch could face a leadership challenge within months after bombing at PMQs and struggling to see off reform in the past. And almost by massive coincidence, Boris Johnson is also rumoured to be plotting a big political comeback too. As the Daily Telegraph reports today, 5 friends and allies of the former Prime Minister claim he's getting bored of life away from Westminster and he believes he has unfinished business in Parliament. The friends believe he's only 50-50 to make a comeback, and Boris himself has reportedly not yet made up his mind. And when quizzed by the Daily Telegraph, Mr Johnson said, "I'm working flat out on writing some books and building a new kitchen." I've heard of bizarre fantasies this week of a Boris comeback that'd see the Tories merge with Reform UK. Without mentioning Boris Johnson, Tory grandee Sir Edward Lee thinks the deal is on.
And what are the odds on Reform and the Tories merging to be one party at the next election?
Oh, I think very high. I mean...
odds on?
70%, I should think.
Well, let's be honest. Boris Johnson had tons of character, he still does, and he knew how to win elections. But the full effects of his disastrous leadership are now beginning to be felt all across Britain. Not least his obsession with net zero and his open-door immigration policy that's changing the very fabric of our country. Tory voters thought they were getting a libertarian Conservative who would cut taxes and control our borders. Boris had the power to do everything Donald Trump is doing right now in America, only 6 years earlier. He really could have taken back control. All of it. He could have been the best Prime Minister we ever had. Instead, the reality is that he bottled it, and he chose to inflict an open borders experiment on Britain, a deranged march to net zero, and devastating lockdowns too. Ironically, he became one of the worst Prime Ministers this country's ever had. So, Boris, don't even think about it. Keep writing your books, stay in the kitchen. We're moving on without you, and despite you. Well, I'm joined now by their former advisor to Boris Johnson, Oscar Redrop. Oscar, good evening. Thank you for joining me.
Good evening, Ben.
It all seems to be happening. What a coincidence. Kemi is under pressure. There's a leadership coup potentially underway, and then talk of your old boss, coming back into the fray. Have you spoken to Boris recently about this?
Not recently, and certainly not since those rumours surrounding Kemi have come to the fore. I think the message I'd have to the Tory party quickly on that is calm down. I mean, it's quite a hard reality for the Tory party to suck up, but we are in the wilderness. We are borderline irrelevant at the moment. The idea that we need to start chopping and changing and chucking leaders out already, or, off the back of, disappointing PMQs performances is insane. I mean, most people don't watch PMQs. Most people don't care about PMQs. Most people don't care about the Tory party right now. And that's OK. And if anything, that's an opportunity to just stay calm, get yourself together and stop thrashing around. Because that's what the public ultimately got so sick and tired of, I think, in the end.
Do you think these two events are linked? The fact that there's now talk about Kemi being dethroned and Boris coming back?
You can never underestimate the mischief-making that goes on in the background of political parties. And, of course, that extends to the Tory party. But, look, in terms of... Look, there's a reason why people, and with the greatest respect to them, don't rumour and fantasise or, kind of stir up a need or want for the return of Rishi Sunak or Theresa May. And there's a reason why they do so with Boris, and that's because Boris is still box office. He is fascinating. He has X Factor. He is a celebrity. You can walk through streets and people will literally hang out their windows waving, trying to get a selfie.
Hasn't he been found out now?
Well, here's the point. The weather has changed. Like, the political weather has changed since 2019. Boris was a huge part of that. And it's changed since Boris left in 2022. So it's so unlikely. And I know we like to get overexcited about these things, but there are even really boring, by-election kind of, hurdles in the way and all the rest of it. But I would say, and this is where someone like Farage fills this void, in all fairness. But when you look at Keir Starmer, when you look at the leadership we have now in this country, there is no drive, there's no imagination, there's no passion, there's no anything. And that's why there is sometimes going to be a Boris-shaped hole.
OK, well, let's get the thoughts of my panel now. Journalist and comms advisor Linda Jubilee, former Met Police Detective Peter Blexley, and the man I'll come to next, former Labour Special Advisor Paul Richards. Paul, you heard what Oscar had to say there about your lot in government. What do you make of it? And also Boris on the potential comeback trail. Would you be worried about that as a Labour man?
There's a lot to unpack there, isn't there? Let's face it. I think that on the Kemi and PMQs, I disagree with Oscar, because although you're right, no one's watching PMQs, it does set the tone. And week after week, you can see those Conservative backbenchers trooping out of the chamber, dejected and sad that yet another open goal had been missed. The Labour Party is giving quite a few opportunities, let's face it, for robust opposition. And it just seems to be, the low bar, she goes under it every week. And so it does set a tone. So I can see why there are rumblings about Kemi. I also agree with Oscar that the barriers and hurdles that Boris would have to overcome, he's not an MP, let's not forget, he's not even there. He'd have to come back as an MP, he'd have to be elected as leader of the Conservative Party, he'd have to then go into a general election. I don't think he wants to do all of that, and I can't see the mechanism whereby that happens. So it's fun, but I don't think it's happening.
Linda?
Yeah, Paul's right. There are all these technicalities. His old seat of Uxbridge has gone to Labour. His previous to that old seat of Henley, that's gone to the Lib Dems. So there are lots of technical stuff in the way. But remember what he said when he was standing outside Number 10 and he resigned. He said he wanted to be like Cincinnatus. Yeah. That's the Roman statesman who went into the wilderness and came back to power as a dictator. Now, I think it was someone like Maya Angelou said, when someone tells you what they want to do, listen the first time. So I don't think that whatever we think about whether he should or he shouldn't come back, I don't think Boris is really concentrating on his kitchen furniture.
Peter, he could have been great, Boris. He could have been the best Prime Minister we ever had. He could have been in the form of Churchill, his hero. Why did he bottle it so badly, may I add?
Well, Oscar was advising him.
Whoa! Right, that's it. There we go.
I'm not 100% responsible for everything. But before Boris Johnson comes anywhere near paid public service again, he needs to reconnect with the old-fashioned concept of telling the truth. Yeah. And until that man can do that, it's best that he keeps writing books and sorting out coving, skirting and his hob.
Oscar, you were advising him. Did you not give him good advice? Or did he ignore you? What was it?
Look, this is the thing. Boris is Boris, and people, I think, tried to...
Is he unadvisable?
In some ways, yes, and in some ways that brings out the best in him. And I've actually said that publicly and been ridiculed for it in terms of like being really kind of laissez-faire and Boris, just go do your thing, mate. And people kind of go, that's highly unprofessional, and you, as an advisor, you should be. Yeah. But that's how you get the best out of him. And you try and, I mean, we look at Keir Starmer, for instance, who is someone who can hardly take one step in front of the other without, you know, a million advisors advising him how to do so. And it's painful to watch. And actually, I just found with Boris, that star quality, you leave it alone. You just got to let it do its thing. However, attention to detail probably wasn't his strong suit. But when we look at the issues our country have now, and I know you will say, Ben, well, he's responsible for X, Y, and Z of them, but you know, by that aside, we are crying out for radical creative ideas in this country.
Telling the truth is not detail, Oscar. It's a fundamental principle of public service.
I think Boris is someone that, particularly on a couple of key issues, if I may, really quickly, stuff like levelling up, he was so passionate about, genuinely, not in a pretend way, he was genuinely so invigorated and passionate about that sometimes that passion kind of left other things potentially, All
right, well, shame he didn't care much about the one thing that most voters in this country care about, the Brexit voters indeed, which was immigration, 1.2 million in the Boris wave. Dennis, very quickly, you said, sorry, Boris had his chance and blew it. Carry on making money, Boris, but do us all a favour and announce your retirement from active politics. There we go. Thank you, panel.